Welcome back, everybody. This Week in America, website thisweekinamerica.us. Great to have you with us on the program. Back with us, author B.D. Salerno. She is the author of the new book, Exploring Forensic Astrology, The Secrets Behind Famous Family Murders. B.D. was with us a number of years ago. She earned a bachelor's degree in English and Italian from Douglas College, attended graduate school at Rutgers University, both in New Brunswick, New Jersey. As an amateur crime sleuth, she was naturally drawn to forensic astrology as a means for delving into crimes and disappearances. Their first book that we talked about was Forensic by the Stars, Astrology Investigates, and BD is back with us on This Week in America. Welcome back to the program. It's great to have you with us again today.
Hi there, Rick. Thanks for having me again.
I am looking forward to our discussion. The new book is Exploring Forensic Astrology, The Secrets Behind Famous Family Murders. And you describe yourself as your specialty is crime astrology or forensic astrology. For a lot of people, they're like, I've heard of forensic, I've heard of astrology, not used to hearing them together. Exactly what type of astrology are we talking about?
Basically, we're talking about what we call event astrology, which is very widely practiced by astrologers today, and it involves studying the horoscope for an event, such as an inauguration, a bombing. It could be a political event, an election. A lot of people focus on that, and deriving information from the stars and planets that describe the event. And when applied to crimes, it's pretty much the same technique, except that you are looking for descriptors concerning the victim and the perpetrator and the events of the crime, which are fairly described in horoscopes of crimes.
You know, what's interesting is, and you discuss in the book, this is sort of ancient astrology techniques that we're still using today. Talk about that, because it's interesting. Maybe how you access these is a little different, but these are techniques that have been around for literally thousands of years.
Yes, it's fascinating to go back into old astrology texts and see that they wrote extensively about certain qualities in a person's horoscope. They could see what kind of life the person would have. Would they make a suitable king or queen? Because most astrologers were employed by courts. They weren't employed by the regular masses. And they were used as consultants in many matters, like going to war, building new buildings, conquering a city, amassing an army. And so this went back hundreds of years, and it was written about by the ancient astrologers how to do these kinds of readings. Unfortunately, a lot of that material was lost to us until the early 90s. There was a project begun by some astrologers called the Hindsight Project, where a lot of these old texts that were found were translated from the ancient Arabic and Greek. And this is a gift to astrology, because this knowledge was unknown to us for for hundreds of years. And in those texts, they talk a lot about mundane events, like the sailing of a ship, the coronation of a king. Wars were a big subject, that the birth of a child, would my son make a prince or a king? And they also talked about problems like who stole the jewelry. They talked about different types of crimes, and they also discussed the qualities of personalities. You can go back in these old texts, like I have done in the book. I've made a number of quotations. If the individual sun is in a particular configuration to the moon and so forth, they will have problems with the parents. They may likely be murdered. They may likely murder a sibling or a close relation. They may likely suffer a violent death. Now, in today's thought of astrology, those are kind of unpleasant thoughts. We don't really want to know about things like that. But back then, there was such a different view of life. I mean, death was inevitable. If you lived a long time, you were very lucky. And in the courts, they wanted to know certain things. They wanted to know if there was going to likely be a murder, if somebody was going to be susceptible to bad acts. So I went into those, and I was already doing crime astrology at that time. And I found so many guideposts to understanding the nature of a horoscope in terms of crime or violence. And so I thought, well, why don't I try these out and see how well they work? And I took it from there, just started taking famous crimes that had always intrigued me and getting the information. I did a lot of research, which I enjoy a lot doing when I'm also doing astrology. And I just started to find correlations between what the ancients wrote and what has happened in famous crimes of today.
And you've taken famous crimes of today that we're all familiar with. Our guest on the program, B.D. Salerno, she is the author of Exploring Forensic Astrology, The Secrets Behind Famous Family Murders. The website for information, a blog, and you can follow B.D. is astrologyinvestigates.com. The book's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, B.D. Salerno. Her first book that we talked about in the program, Forensics by the Stars, Astrology Investigates. In the new book, Exploring Forensic Astrology, you've taken some of these murders. First of all, you put them in different classifications, and we'll talk about, let's talk about, what is it, mariticide? Am I pronouncing that correctly? This is the spousal murders?
Yes.
And
I called it mariticide.
Okay, I wasn't sure if I was saying that correctly, but
mariticide. Honestly, I'm not sure because I usually say spousal murder.
Well, I was going to say that, but I was trying to use the big word, and I'm not sure I used it correctly. You're the expert, so we'll go with your pronunciation. It's interesting. Phil Hartman is one that comes to mind, and for people that can remember, an excellent comedian, Saturday Night Live. When you were talking about that, it's interesting because you said as you were comparing the comparison between the natal charts, actually showed that there were many warning signs. Can you use astrology in cases to really maybe prevent something from happening?
That's the question that dances around in my mind when I do these kinds of discussions, because there's an element, I think, of I hate to use the word destiny. There's an element of the tendency of this to happen or the likelihood of this to happen.
Right.
And I don't know how one would prevent it. I think in the spousal murder chapters in the book, possibly had the people consulted an astrologer before their marriage, these warning signs would have become evident. And I'm also talking about Lacey and Scott Peterson because there were some real warning flags that I said in my book. An astrologer, had they consulted one before they got married, there would have been signs of real trouble down the road. I think that's part of the reason I'm trying to spread awareness about astrology. You can see evidence of troubles to come. If you're open and receptive, if you have a competent astrologer to look at that for you, you can see that, you're crazy in love with this guy, but he might not be the best choice for you. Then again, people tend to make certain choices based on attraction, which you can see that clearly in horoscopes between marriage partners.
Right.
And sometimes that overrides any common sense, as I'm sure we've all found out at some point in our lives.
Well, yes, and it's interesting with Scott Peterson because you say this guy was with the master at deception, and which he pulled that on his wife, and he pulled that on a lot of friends that were with him at his side during this until they found out, wait a minute, the evidence really indicates that he was responsible.
Yes, he was so much a master at deception. I watched that whole trial. We used to have court TV, and I used to be addicted to court TV. And he would actually show up in court. He looked different every day. One day he had his hair dyed. One day
I can remember that.
One
yes.
day wore a certain style of clothing. One day he was a real chameleon. And I don't know that there was a moral fiber in his body. He was just concerned with having things his own way and would do anything to get them, including murdering his wife and child.
So you really feel in doing the background look on this, the jury got it right. He's actually locked up and waiting on a death sentence, and that's where he should be.
Right.
The book is called...
Yes, that was to me was a pretty clear-cut confirmation, and just the facts of the case alone really sealed the deal. But the reason I do this is, some people say, well, we know that he did it, we know he killed her, so why are you bringing this up? Well, my point is that astrology shows that. So shouldn't astrology be considered as a possible investigative tool? It confirms what we know in fact. It's not some crazy gibberish that from the stars and planets that only some oracle can interpret. So I think when the horoscopes confirm the events of the case, then I believe that's a point for paying a lot more attention to astrology, especially what I call forensic astrology.
You have worked on solving crimes, you have worked on missing persons, you've had success. When you are dealing with authorities, when you're dealing with the legal system, when you're dealing with attorneys who are representing clients, what kind of a response do you get from them? Do they acknowledge the fact that this is a tool, there is something here that we should at least be willing to consider?
Well, actually, to set the record straight, I really haven't worked with that level of law enforcement yet. I have been contacted by investigators, and the operative word there is I was contacted. People have to come to me and ask for my help, because then I will know that they're open-minded. They're not going to bring me into a case to discredit everything I have to say. And so I was contacted, did work a few cases with a couple of different investigators. Unfortunately, they were private, doing things on their own. And when they would go back to law enforcement with tips that I would uncover, they weren't getting anywhere. I don't know that they were even revealing that I was their source.
So there still is some skepticism there.
Yeah, there's a lot of skepticism, I think. But when you see that a lot of police, when they're at their wits' end, they will consult a psychic. Well, I wish when that happened they would also consult an astrologer, because we could provide a lot, as I've tried to show in my books. There's so much to be uncovered that maybe wasn't apparent. At least what we can do in cold cases is provide a lead.
The book is...
We could say, well, the victim knew the killer. Well, then you're ruling out hundreds of thousands of possible suspects.
Well, exactly.
There's ways you can see that, and that helps. If they have no idea in a cold case of who did something or what happened, it would be helpful to know that the victim knew the killer.
And it's very extensive. The research that you've done, the information you have, it's not just sort of a theory. It's all documented in the book. Exploring Forensic Astrology, The Secrets Behind Famous Family Murders. B.D. Salerno, our guest in the program. Our first book is Forensic by the Stars, Astrology Investigates. Information at the website astrologyinvestigates.com. The book's available all across the country. And, of course, you can link on directly by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. In talking about murders of a child, it's interesting because you've got a chapter in there on JonBenet Ramsey that has been in the news recently. You came to some of your conclusions months ago, so it's not something influenced, by Dr. Phil or something that we've seen here in the last couple of weeks. And you basically described this as disturbing on a number of levels. First of all, talk about that aspect of it and some of your findings by looking at the astrology related to the case.
Well, the first disturbing thing, Rick, was that it happened on Christmas night.
Yes.
And that upset me because as a child, that was, of course, my favorite holiday. It probably is for every kid. And she was just such a bright personality. You could see that there was an aura about her that emanated from her photographs. And right away, I felt terrible for the parents. For years, until probably last year, I really didn't think they could have had anything to do with it. And I'll say I didn't think they could have anything to do with it because I could not conceive of something like this happening. It was just too awful. As much as I've done crime, I still can't stand a lot of what I investigate.
Yes.
And so I felt sorry for the parents. I was really in their corner. And then when I did the chart, well, I brushed all bias out of my mind, which you kind of have to do. You have to have amnesia when you do this work sometimes. I started working on the chart a couple of years ago. I was like, this really doesn't look good. This does not work. And I had believed the investigator Lou Smith, who was discussed at length in the past couple of weeks on various TV shows. I really believed in the intruder theory, mainly because I could not fathom how else it could have happened. But when I studied the case, I think I read 4 books on the case when I got serious about it. The more I learned, the more I thought this whole thing is so phony. It's so totally, it makes no sense. It was completely disconnected. It looks like some accident that was then, there was this hysterical frenzy to change the facts, to cover up the facts. So I'm going from being a Ramsey supporter to feeling that, oh, there's absolutely no way that they were not involved in this. It makes no sense any other way. How the ransom note got into the house, how somebody could sit down after doing that and write a note which took at least 20 minutes to write because they timed it. So then going to the chart, and then I began to apply what I was learning from the ancient theories, and I got JonBenet's birth information, and that child had an extremely troubled horoscope and was really in danger. I mean, there's ways to see danger in a horoscope, and she was in danger with the parents. There was a lot of stressful indicators in that. And then looking at what eventually happened to her, the crime chart supported what was sort of foreshadowed in her birth horoscope, that there was danger from the parents and the family, the whole family.
Yeah, and a lot of people looking at the young brother Burke. When you looked into that, is that plausible that's where it started? Was maybe an accident, something that got out of control, and then the family participated?
So much accidental, but probably just an outburst of some sort.
Yes,
and maybe not intentional. Wouldn't say it was premeditated murder. It probably was more like a manslaughter issue. But the strain between brother and sister are also emphasized in these horoscopes. And so putting that together with all the books I read and the research, I'm firmly convinced it was a family situation that just really got out of control. And very sadly, they have been getting so much support, and nothing's come of the indictment. Nothing's come of all, they're saying there's no real evidence. But, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, and they're taking a couple of molecules of DNA and throwing out the common sense of the rest of the case.
Right, and all of this...
The logistics of somebody going into that house in the first place, it just doesn't hold water.
Now, and you lay all of that out, especially with the astrological evidence in the book, Exploring Forensic Astrology, The Secrets Behind Famous Family Murders. Our guest on the program, rapidly running out of time, B.D. Salerno. The book is available all across the country. Information at her website, astrologyinvestigates.com, and you can go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and log on and get all of that information. A couple minutes left in the program. Are you somewhat surprised when you sat down? In fact, I've heard you say that I come up with this book and I've got all these famous murder cases, and people are suggesting more. Are you somewhat surprised sometimes when you sit down and you look at all the evidence, how clear it becomes when we're reading what the charts say?
I wouldn't say surprised, because I know that astrology is the truth. I'm always in awe of it. I'm like, I know this stuff works, but it is really amazing. I am in awe of it. I guess you could say that's surprise. I have such a high regard for it, and the fact that people thousands of years ago who had no computers, had no charts of the heavenly skies at all, were able to come across this knowledge, which still holds water when it's tested like I tested it in my books. It is just a thing that is awesome, and that's my mission, is to spread the word about it.
Well, and you're doing it very well. The book is Exploring Forensic Astrology, The Secrets Behind Famous Family Murders, a number of murders that we've talked about for years. You detail in the book Exploring Forensic Astrology. BD's first book, Forensics by the Stars, Astrology Investigates, is still available as well. Information at the website, astrologyinvestigates.com. Book available, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all across the country. And, of course, you can link on to BD by going directly to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. BD, as always, a pleasure to have you on the program. Look forward to having you back on the show. Thank you for being with us once again. Fascinating show, and great job in the book.
All right. Thanks so much, Rick. I'll look forward to talking with you again.
B.D. Salerno, our guest on the program. The book, Exploring Forensic Astrology, The Secrets Behind Famous Family Murders. Information available. You can land directly to B.D.'s website by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Stay tuned. The program continues right after these messages.